we proudly say, Slava Ukraina, Heroyam Slava. We thank our Board of Trustees, Chairman Dennis McGrath, Manor's Ukrainian Community Committee of its Board of Trustees, chaired by Leonard Mazer, and we thank you for supporting our mission, heritage, and our programs, especially today's. Let's also take a moment to thank Roman Pedik, Chairman of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union Board, Mary Kolody, its President, and Anatoly Murha, the credit union's Director of Business Development. All have been instrumental to tonight's program. UKR-FCU remains our lead and presenting sponsor, providing new opportunities for the members of the credit union. Roman, can I please invite you to say a few words?
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union and its 12,000 member account holders, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fall 2020 session of the Ukrainian Dialogues. This is the fourth year that UKRFCU is serving as the sponsor of this important community forum. This year is, of course, like no other, and it has required all of us to adapt to the realities of social distancing and the efforts required to control the spread of our pandemic virus. So today we are convening the dialogues via video feed. This is on one hand regrettable because it eliminates the in-person interactions in the sessions that we value and that truly, I believe, help build understanding of our views and our differing positions. But on the other hand, the video live feed format offers us an opportunity to draw an audience from around the world and certainly from areas that would not normally draw physical participants. There is also another advantage to the virtual format, and that is the ability to recruit speakers who might otherwise not have been able to appear or whose schedule was too challenged to make the trip to the beautiful Manor College campus in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, where these sessions normally occur. Partly, but not entirely as a result of that serendipity, we have been able to assemble an amazing complement of presenters for this year's session that President Perry will present to you shortly. I said earlier that this is the credit union's fourth year as a sponsor of these sessions, but in reality, we are more than financial sponsors. UKRFCU approaches this event with the same passion that we bring to all of our work on behalf of the community. We care deeply that our community and its institutions are able to realize their full potential, and we have approached our involvement with the Ukrainian Dialogues with that same fervor. In this regard, I need to especially single out Anatoly Murha, the credit union's vice president, responsible for our marketing initiatives and community outreach. Anatoly has worked hand in glove with Manor's wonderful marketing team to ensure that this event was promoted to a broad swath of the community, and this has resulted in an amazing level of participation. As of this afternoon, we had well over 225 registered participants for the event. I'm not sure exactly how many are online. I know that some people drop off, but still, this is really amazing compared to the physical participation that we've seen in prior sessions. So, as I said, this is both a curse, but in many ways a blessing. And I would venture to suggest that in the future, we may do these sessions in a dual hybrid format with both in-person and perhaps video feeds as a way of really generating broader engagement. So we've done very well as a result of these marketing efforts, but that is not all that Anatoly has brought to this venture. Those who know Anatoly know that he is one of those people who knows people in every city where there is a Ukrainian diaspora and also throughout Ukraine. And Anatoly has used those relationships to great effect by introducing both Brian Bonner, the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post, and Ukrainian parliamentarian Solomia Bobrovska to the event and convincing them to participate in speakers. Anatoly and Manor College have been a wonderful team, and UKRFCU is privileged to have wonderful partners in Manor College for these events. We look forward to many years of continuing engagement with Manor and to continuation of the Ukrainian dialogue session. Dr. Perry.
Thank you very much, Roman. At Manor College, we are so grateful for this collaboration with Roman and the Credit Union, Anatoly and Mary, and others like it that help us to offer more than 50 associates, bachelor's, and certificate programs to traditional and non-traditional students. We are local, accessible, online, and on land. We provide our students with excellent academic and transformative opportunities that enable them to fully develop as individuals. And education at Manor leads to an understanding of scientific, humanistic, and ethical principles, so our students form a global vision. We've been blessed with success with this program, and today is the 9th in Manor College's Ukrainian Dialogue series. As you know, it is formally titled Zelensky's First Year Leading Up to America's Presidential Election. I will be serving as moderator. After each of our panelists have had some time to share presenting remarks, we will engage in some Q&A. On the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button to submit questions. Questions will be selected by me at the end of today's program. Not all questions may be able to be answered, depending upon quantity and quality. We ask that you keep your questions succinct. Multiple and compound questions will not likely be entertained. Before we go further, let's please offer a prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin today's program. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we share information that we hope will bring peace, freedom, democracy, and prosperity to Ukraine and America. And continue to remind us that all we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service to humanity. We ask for the intercession of Saints Macrina and Basil the Great to support our petitions, and we request these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Now, let us introduce our speakers. We're blessed with an amazing panel of speakers, all of whom are here today out of their pure, gracious kindness. Their credentials speak for themselves, and with our limited time, my introductions will be brief. His Excellency, Volodymyr Yelchenko, has been serving as the ambassador of Ukraine since 2019. Prior to this role, and since 2015, the Honorable Yelchenko was the appointed permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations. This was a role he held right after his service as the ambassador of Ukraine to Russia. And on March 17th of 2014, during the Crimean crisis, Ambassador Yelchenko was recalled from Moscow for consultation on that situation. Before that, from 2006 to 2010, Honorable Yelchenko served as permanent representative of Ukraine to the international organizations in Vienna, Austria, having served at various senior international foreign policy posts prior to that. The Honorable Solomia Bobrovska is the secretary of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and Interparliamentary Cooperation in Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. In 2014, Solomia served as an advisor to the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, Oleksandr Sinch. In 2016, at the age of 26, Solomia headed the Odessa Regional State Administration becoming the youngest head of the region in the history of Ukraine. Her areas of interest include gender equality, foreign policy, national security, and defense. And Brian Bonner became chief editor of the Kyiv Post on June 9th, 2008. He also held the job in 1999, 3 years after first arriving in Ukraine to teach journalism. Mr. Bonner spent most of his career with the St. Paul Pioneer Press in Minnesota, where he covered international, national, and local news for more than 20 years as a staff writer and assigning editor. Besides Ukraine, he has also reported from at least 10 other countries, worked as an election expert on 6 observation missions with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and he was a regional coordinator of the Danish-funded Objective Investigative Reporting Program from 2013 to 2017. He is a member of the Supervisory Board of Media Development Foundation, which promotes investigative journalism and training of journalists and exchanges. Without further ado, we would normally warmly welcome our speakers with an applause, and so we're going to give them a virtual applause and ask His Excellency Yelchenko to start us off.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or well, good night in Kiev. I have an advantage that we are in the time belt of just 6 p.m. But I hope that my colleagues will also feel comfortable enough. Well, thank you for bringing us together, especially on such an important topic. In fact, I was planning to visit your place in person, physically, but I still hope that as soon as time permits, I will do it. Now, on the topic of our discussion, I would like to start from by saying that over the course of the past year and a half, since President Zelensky election, Ukraine went through major transformations. In April 2019, Ukrainian people gave President Zelensky an unprecedented level of support with over 73% of their votes. Later that year, the president's party, the Servant of the People, once again won in a landslide and secured a supermajority in the Rada with unique powers to legislate and to spearhead reforms. New government was formed, tasked with delivering real results and delivering them fast. Over the 29 years of Ukraine's independence, people have been longing for real changes. For too many years, these changes were too slow to come. Ukrainians, seeing a much faster pace of reforms among their neighbors in the former Soviet bloc, demanded new faces and a different approach. President Zelensky and his team received a clear mandate to tackle head-on the threats and problems that the country has been facing. Russian aggression that continues for over 6 years in a row, longer than World War II. The corruption that, despite all previous efforts, had not been eradicated, and speeding up reforms that would tangibly improve the lives of all people. President Zelensky's mandate also included the task of advancing Ukraine on its course towards becoming a strong and prosperous democratic European nation, a full-fledged member of European and transatlantic institutions. The goals of the EU and NATO membership are written in the Ukrainian constitution. The course towards becoming a nation free of corruption, a nation of freedom and rule of law, has once and for all been set during the Revolution on Dignity. These are the goals we are working on and the values Ukrainians are fighting for, defending our land and our choice from the ongoing Russian military aggression. On the reform track, over the past year and a half, a lot has been accomplished, including the things that had been promised by countless politicians and by practically all convocations of the Rada in the past. The absolute immunity of members of parliament has finally been abolished. The law on the procedure of impeachment of the president has been passed. The law on land market has finally been passed, removing the anachronistic restrictions and opening up major opportunities for investments, development of Ukraine's agriculture, and return of Ukraine to once again being the breadbasket of Europe. The new law on banking sector has been passed, and Ukraine is working very closely with the IMF, reforming its economy, financial system, customs, and tax services, creating the conditions to ensure financial stability, investments, and economic growth. We have climbed 7 positions in the World Bank Doing Business 2020 report, ranking 64th out of 190 states. Ukraine has improved 6 out of 10 indicators, including protecting minority investors, registering property, and trading across borders. Absolute top priority is given to eradicating corruption, strengthening the rule of law, transforming the judiciary and law enforcement. Ukraine completed the establishment of the system of anti-corruption institutions, covering all stages from prevention to conviction. The High Anti-Corruption Court was launched in September 2019 and is reviewing cases received from Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Office. The National Bureau of Investigation has become fully operational. Ongoing full-scale privatization is helping Ukraine to divest its non-core assets and attract new investments. High priority is given to the digital economy and e-government. The concept of a state in a smartphone minimizes bureaucracy, removing the possibilities for corruption and radically improving the ways how the government serves the needs of the people. Successful reform of decentralization continues. New laws and regulations created 1,469 territorial communities with substantial powers to decide local matters locally, and amendments to the budget and tax codes gave them the necessary resources, which in the past had been divided and disbursed from Kiev. Next week, on October 25th, Ukrainians will go to the polls to vote at local elections. Ukraine is implementing the provisions of the association agreement with the European Union, as well as Ukraine-NATO annual programs. In June of this year, Ukraine was granted the status of an enhanced opportunities partner, which marks a new step of cooperation with NATO, bringing us closer to the membership in the alliance. Perhaps one of the most important reforms that has existential significance for Ukraine today is the reform of our armed forces, which are defending Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukrainians celebrated the Day of the Defenders of the Homeland, paying tribute to those who gave their lives defending their nations. On the security track, despite President Zelensky's success in unblocking the Normandy 4 talks, as well as release of prisoners, the situation on the ground unfortunately remains essentially the same. As I already mentioned, Russia's military aggression against Ukraine and its occupation of parts of our territory is continuing for over 6 years now. 44,000 square kilometers, or 7% of Ukraine's territory, remain illegally occupied. Over 14,000 people have been killed, over 27,000 wounded. Almost 2 million have been forced to flee their homes in Crimea and Donbass and became internally displaced persons or refugees. Russia continues to supply weapons and ammunition across the border, to increase its military capabilities along the border with Ukraine, and to militarize Crimea, including massive transfers to Crimea of weapons systems systems such as nuclear-capable aircraft and missiles. It continues to threaten Ukraine from the sea and to block or impede major trade routes. Russia continues systematic human rights violations in the temporarily occupied Crimea, including willful killings, torture, covert demographic changes, recruiting Ukrainian citizens in Crimea into the Russian army, persecution of Crimean Tatars, pro-Ukrainian activists and religious communities, taking away of property rights from those without Russian citizenship. In addition to the hard security threats, no less dangerous are the threats posed by Russia's disinformation and propaganda machines, working on a global scale to distort the perception of reality, blur the lines, and turn an aggressor into a victim and vice versa. To this day, Russia continues to deny its involvement in the conflict in Donbass, trying to present itself not as an aggressor, but as a peacemaker. President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government are taking steps toward finding a peaceful solution of the Russian-Ukrainian armed conflict. We have presented numerous initiatives within the Trilateral Contact Group and strive to reinvigorate the work of the Normandy 4 format, but we are yet to see the same level of constructiveness from Russia. Instead, it keeps brandishing weapons on our borders with massive military exercises and keeps pushing for fake elections in the occupied territories. After over 20 failed ceasefires, we have managed to achieve yet another ceasefire in Donbass, which started on July 27th. However, it is again being constantly violated by Russia-led forces. Our security-first position remains unchanged. Only once full security on the ground is provided can we start dealing with the political track. Regarding the Crimea, Ukraine has proposed a new consultation and coordination format, the Crimean Platform, to increase effectiveness of the international response to the ongoing occupation of the peninsula, to address mounting security threats, enhance international pressure on the Kremlin to make it change its behavior, prevent further human rights violations, and to achieve an eventual de-occupation of Crimea and its return to Ukraine. Until Russia gets out of Donbass and Crimea, there must be no rolling back of sanctions, and unified position of the international community is critical. Therefore, we highly appreciate the robust US leadership in keeping the transatlantic unity and increasing pressure on Russia for its aggressive and malign behavior. We're also deeply grateful for the unparalleled financial, technical, military, and other types of US assistance. The Crimea Declaration countering the Nord Stream 2 project, the strong sanctions policy, the provision of security and defense assistance, including lethal weapons, the aid with transforming our armed forces are telling examples of the strength of Ukraine-US relations. Further strengthening these relations is Ukraine's and personally President Zelensky's priority. Our nations are strategic partners in a wide range of areas. Among them is non-proliferation, where the contribution of Ukraine, which gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, is essential. They include international peace and security, where Ukraine has been part of all NATO-led operations together with the US, including in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is also energy security. And just last month, we signed another major contract with Westinghouse, diversifying our nuclear fuel supplies. It is exploration of space, and less than 2 weeks ago, Antares, a Ukrainian rocket, delivered NASA cargo to the International Space Station from the Wallops Island launch facility in Virginia. It is cybersecurity, it is trade and investments, and many, many other spheres. The US is a major partner in Ukraine's implementation of domestic reforms, strengthening the rule of law, and eradicating corruption. We highly value the bipartisan support of Ukraine in the United States, which we have always felt from the dawn of Ukraine's independence, no matter who was in the White House or which party, Republican or Democrat, controlled the House or the Senate. Today, when Ukraine is facing the hardest challenges in its modern history, the US support and the bipartisan consensus is as strong as ever. Therefore, I'm confident that whoever wins in this year's elections in the United States, our friendship and strategic partnership will continue to grow, as both Ukraine and the United States are determined to make this relationship even stronger. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to hear your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We're going to next move over to Honorable Bobrovska. Solomia?
Second, I'm here.
Yes, why don't you please feel free to share your remarks.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, and greetings from Ukraine. I'm not so, I would say, with not so many positive remarks as Mr. Honorable Ambassador was to Mr. President, because what we saw a year and a half ago was actually inexperienced politician who nevertheless gathered a team of young reformers and actually, to be honest, was trying and aiming good, I would say. His lack of experience was causing worries, of course, but still in the beginning he initiated a number of important reforms which were marked, and of course the end of Russia-Ukrainian war. But our fears in the parliament grew with and started with the so-called turbo regime. I would say it's a new word. It's a term describing the speed of the lawmaking, and with several appointments violating the illustration law, and with the doubtful legality of the dissolution of the former convocation of the parliament. On the other hand, as I already mentioned, President Zelensky initiated a land reform before
Looks like Solomia froze on us here. So we'll
Yes, Solomia, if you can hear us, can you please exit and re-enter? I think that might be the best.
Okay. Well, wow.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Solomia, you got cut off, so why don't you
Yes.
start back about 30 seconds before where you are now.
Okay. I just mentioned about the land reform, then the lift of parliamentary immunity of the MPs, and then decided introduction of the procedure of the impeachment of the president, which was previously non-existent. But he actually promised to support anti-corruption bodies and reform Ukraine's judiciary, what we didn't see so far now. But as I mentioned, the core point of the program was to end the war with Russia, and a little bit later I will point this point of view. But from to be frankly speaking, I would say that the point of no return happened in January 2019, when President Zelensky 2020, when President Zelensky flew to Oman, and this is still no understanding what he was doing there, because so many lies was about the purpose of his visit to Oman, and even I made lots of wrote lots of documents to the Office of President to figure out what was happening in that day in Oman, because when we had Iran shut down the Ukrainian plane, Zelensky needed approximately 20 hours to get back to Ukraine. But it is alleged that because of this meeting, probably he met with Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of Russian Security Council and a close ally of Putin, and was still worrying about this point of visit to Oman. And actually, shortly after this visit, the then Chief of Staff Andriy Bogdan was fired, and then Yermak took his place. Then in the early March, we saw how the cabinet was dismissed, and I see it actually as links of one chain, because, for example, starting from March, a lot of reformers who had the position in the government, they were fired, and I can mention here the Minister of, for example, Education, Hanna Novosad, who was the member of parliament before, then Minister of Defense, Andriy Zagorodnyuk, and which is interesting. For example, Andriy Taran replaced the Minister of Defense, but moreover, he is accused of treason in 2015, and new deputy of chief of staff was serving as a police chief in Yanukovych period, and most probably was authorizing police attacks on Maidan. New Minister of Youth and Sports is business partner for Russia, grew colonel, and this is list of awful HR decision is not exhaustive. What I would say that from my point of view and from point of view of my faction, because we are in opposition and it's normal to have this words, that most of the reforms conducted in 2014-19 were reserved or stalled. For example, no reset of the judiciary took place. Health reform was sabotaged, and the third health of minister of Zelensky is in a row is not signing documents, for example, authorizing purchases of medicine for the state programs for seriously ill people. Then new education minister, a former president of one of the university, prohibited students to hand out national flags during, for example, Revolution of Dignity, and he is also accused of plagiarism, and his candidacy was lobbied by the community of corrupt university presidents. And what we saw now, he is successfully holding the acting minister of education. I would say that Zelensky himself is using powers not vested into president, and reminds of the, I'm sorry for that, but late Brezhnev epoch, since he mostly acts as an attractive picture, opening schools, roads, and so on. But what do I have to say, for example, and just to remind who didn't see, who didn't read, for example, when Zelensky the closest circle is accused of corruption and ties with Russian secret services. And a few days ago probably you know, it was reported that British MI6 intelligence agency held the closest meeting with Zelensky, warning him about dangers his surrounding might entail. So, but going back to Russia-Ukrainian relations, I would say that yes, we all remember how many efforts were put to have the meeting in Normandy format, but I want to say that parties undertook almost 6 obligations, and most of which unfortunately failed completely, and the rest were just only particularly successful. For example, the successful step was establishment of the 3 disengagements areas, and so-called ceasefire regime still was violated around 14,000 times. No mine clearance plan was agreed upon, and no access for the SMM OSCE was provided to the occupied territories. And no representatives of the International Red Cross Committee was admitted to Ukrainian detainees. I think that's the red lines we have to talk loudly, because what warns and what we have to remind every time with the Russian Federation. I would say that, for example, but still at that time, if you are going back to Ukrainian-American relations, I would say that on this occasion, President Zelensky has taken the only possible and right position, distancing from the Ukraine Gate scandal and refuting all the allegations. It's very disheartening, I would say, that the world finds out about Ukraine's position on the map from the scandals, and of course, in this story, no good outcome was possible. It was possible only to soften the strike, and I think Zelensky and Ukraine managed to do that. Another important point in our relations, I have to call upon the Derkach leaks. So that's a family. To put it briefly, Andriy Derkach, he is a member of parliament, not for the first time, and in this convocation as well. And his father, Leonid Derkach, who are Russian agents. I would say they are open Russian agents. Andriy Derkach graduated from the FSB Academy, and Leonid Derkach graduated from the KGB Academy and worked for the KGB. In the middle of 90s, they both almost appeared on the political arena to, I would say, to destabilize it permanently since that time. Andriy Derkach published the leaks of so-called talks between Ukraine's former president and Putin, but the question is who could possibly transfer these recordings to him, former president or someone else? And I want just to say to American audience and to Ukrainians who are with us tonight that especially Ukrainians know that we have to find this in Russia with the Russian roots. And so yet again, it has to be said up clearly that Ukraine seeks only development of the Ukrainian-US relations. And I would say that I'm sure that the only country interested in such scandals, of course, is Russian Federation, and that's the way of holding hybrid warfare. Of course, any meddling of Ukraine in the US election is unacceptable, and despite some quotes of President Trump when he forecast, for example, Ukraine's fall in its war with Russia, or claimed that people in Crimea wanted to join Russia, or stated that he does not see why it would be Russia that meddled in 2016 US elections, we see how much the Trump administration and the Senate and the House of Representatives have done to support Ukraine. And sometimes despite President's personal Trump position, and sometimes thanks to it. Whatever it may be, we are grateful for provided help and support. And we know that President Trump administration with the Congress provided Ukraine with the lethal weapon, namely Javelin missiles, also transfer of island patrol boats, and I can't mention $1.6 billion of dollars of security assistance during President Trump tenure, and a broad package of technical assistance. I would say that the main achievement of the President Zelensky is that despite all the scandals for the last year, especially in Ukraine and abroad, he managed not to destroy our bilateral relations. We are grateful that we still have consensus with regards to Russia. Ukraine's position in the sanction has to be preserved, and Russian Federation is still toxic in every sense, business, its politics, and its diplomacy. And I would want to argue to the point that Russia on every international arena is trying to be back to the business as usual model, and we have to be united to to make the opposite steps. Russia still continue manipulating with the COVID issue, to make the West lift the sanctions. Russia still is trying to speculate on the topic of the vaccine development and disperse ugly propaganda as usual, and disinformation regarding the West and its response for the COVID crisis. Therefore, whoever wins the elections has to understand that Russian Federation has absolutely no inclination to play by the rules. And the recent poisoning of Alexei Navalny being the best evidence of it. And softening of the position of the West would only lead to further aggressive actions on Russian part. And I would say that we stay committed to receiving the major NATO ally status and strive to join NATO eventually after fulfilling all preconditions for it. I think that we could do both better and worse during the first year of President of Zelensky. Our task, I think, for the years to come, it is to enhance our cooperation and keep on the track of reforms laid down after the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. Thank you for having my time, and open to questions after Brian, I think.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bobrovska. Brian, would you like to share your remarks, please?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Well, we just got done with the Kyiv Post new edition. It's our 25th birthday. We've been around almost as long as independent Ukraine. There's a sneak preview of our front page. So we are Ukraine's independent English language paper since 1995. I'm an American. I know a lot of Ukrainians who went to America and found their home there. I happen to be an American who went to Ukraine and found his home here. And first off, I appreciate Ambassador Yelchenko's views on foreign policy. He stated Ukraine's case strongly and clearly, most recently, in many places, most recently in the Washington Post, where he praised the decision by the US to sanction Derkach and Telizhenko, who are absolutely poisonous, trying to create a poisonous atmosphere in American foreign policy. And as far as Salomia, I want to note, she's also a Kyiv Post top 30 under 30, a winner. She's wise beyond her years, and it's good that she's serving the public, because whatever our differences, we're united by this. Not only by our support for Ukraine, the West should be doing more, should wake up to the fact that Vladimir Putin is a rogue criminal regime and treat him accordingly. This doesn't mean starting a war, but it certainly means a lot tougher sanctions. We're nowhere near the 10 on the scale of sanctions. And when you have great powers like Germany, building $10 billion pipelines that are going to harm Ukraine, this is a very bad situation. So on foreign policy, the president's been very active. He went to Brussels, he went to London, he's now in Turkey, and he hosted the Polish president. So he's trying to stir things up there. And I have to say that the foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, who I've known for many years, is quite an effective foreign minister as far as I can see, and as far as what I see playing out in Ukraine. But where big improvement needs to happen is on the domestic front. I can go into as many details as I want, but we don't have judicial reform. In fact, the anti-corruption institutions are under attack from many, many directions. The pro-oligarch factions, the pro-Russian factions, and the Constitutional Court. We may end up losing the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and the special anti-corruption prosecutor's never been effective. The one who resigned last August should have been removed long ago for corruption, for blocking investigations. This is a time-old problem, short story. Politicians want to control who runs the courts here because they want to be able to control the rulings. This is not independent judiciary. There's been no justice whatsoever. There's been more convictions in America for Ukrainian corruptions than in Ukraine. There's nothing that would prevent the prosecutor general from filing criminal charges, well documented, well evidenced of bank fraud against billionaire oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, who allegedly stole 5.6 billion from Privat Bank, the largest bank, part of a $20 billion bank. Nothing is happening. Why is it not happening? The oligarchs are feeling very, very comfortable under, they felt comfortable under Petro Poroshenko. They're feeling comfortable under President Volodymyr Zelensky. They have nothing to fear. And in fact, true, yes, Zelensky won by a landslide. There's definitely, the result reflected what Ukrainians wanted. And his faction won by a landslide in parliament also. But I can tell you, ahead of the October 25th, coming up 9 days, local elections, his party is going to lose big time. He's losing popularity. He's losing big support. Why? Because he's done nothing as far as the people are concerned in terms of fighting corruption, in terms of putting people in jail and showing that there's any progress can be made on creating an independent judiciary. Also, a lot of people were disturbed by the fact that he replaced his prime minister, his prosecutor general, his chief of staff, economy minister, the whole government after 6 months. And he just went on BBC last week with Stephen Saka saying, I need more time, I need more time. He said, well, hey, what about the people you fired after 6 months? Why didn't you give them more time? I thought that was a valid point. We have problems in a lot of places in attracting investment. Nobody wants investment more than, I mean, we want it as much as everybody else. Ukraine deserves the prosperity, and it has the tools and natural tools and intellectual tools to get prosperity. What is holding us up? We have very many, corrupt, still badly run businesses. The state railway is a hotbed of corruption. We have people resigning from, Amos Hochstein resigned from Naftogaz, warning that the same corrupt interests are trying to take over the gas company, which has been the source of many illicit fortunes in Ukraine. If you go to parliament, we see, Salomia knows better, but we see that the president seems to have lost his majority. We see Kolomoisky allegedly influencing a huge block of Zelensky's party, and that's going to be sabotaged. We have a very dangerous parliament. When you look at the opposition for life members, that is basically a renegade Yanukovych, party of regions people, pro-Russian, Viktor Medvedchuk, Vladimir Putin's friend, sitting in parliament along with many other corrupt lawmakers who have nothing to fear. So I think I should stop there.
Thank you very much, Brian. So,
before I paint a too bad picture.
I'm sorry?
I don't want to paint too bad of a picture. I still believe in Ukraine, and I believe in the future of this nation.
Thank you, Brian. So we'll get into Q&A now. We do have a few questions in the queue, and I will get to them in a moment. I have a few of my own, not too many, but thought that we would start with Ambassador Yelchenko. Ambassador, you've heard some remarks by the other panelists this evening. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about them. And I don't think that you should answer each and every comment that both of our other panelists have shared, but I think you should have an opportunity to be able to speak to the most salient of issues. And then I want to ask you and all of our panelists a question about the interrelationship between Ukraine's elections and America's elections. And actually one of our folks who are watching asked a question about the political parties in the United States being so deeply divided. So the interdependency would seem to be that you've got the elections on October 25th in Ukraine, and then you've got them in November, early November in the United States. And how do those two impact each other? I would believe that Ukraine's elections may have a bigger impact only because they're earlier, but perhaps it's the other way around because of America's size. So, Ambassador.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very glad to hear such an open discussion. Even if we have differences in opinions, it's good. It's the it's day of democracy, and I'm not afraid, for example, to fully agree with both of my colleagues, panelists, that there's not much satisfaction in Ukraine vis-a-vis the pace of internal reforms. Probably my advantage is that, well, as Solomia rightly and Brian also rightly pointed out, that I belong to the foreign policy army of Ukraine, and the foreign policy of Ukraine was always sort of at the edge of Ukrainian success. I'm not saying this because I belong to the foreign policy, but simply because I know, deeply how many things were achieved in this sphere during Ukraine's independence, and I'm very glad that even during the changes of presidents of Ukraine, we used to have pro-Russian, pro-Western, in the middle. I will not name the names, but the foreign policy of Ukraine remained intact. And we are aiming at things which are in the focus, NATO, European integration. Probably the only sphere in which I'm not fully satisfied is the relations of Ukraine with the third countries. I mean, Africa, Latin America, Asia, we still have a lot of work to be done, and it was always not in the focus, unfortunately. And but as I said, the internal reforms is something which we have a lot to do, and not everything is accomplished. Although I would say that there are still some areas in which, take for example the law on the land. I know, well, of course, I don't pretend to know better than Solomia, for example, but I know how difficult it was to agree in the parliament on that law. I know that the text of the law would have been much worse, but it was a kind of compromise found. Unfortunately, we have to face the reality. The Ukrainian public opinion was not fully ready to have the law which would satisfy, the best standards as far as the Western countries are concerned. But still, we have this law. There are some other things, but I will not go into details because I'm not an expert on internal issues in Ukraine. As far as the elections in Ukraine and the United States are concerned and their interdependency, frankly, I don't see much of interdependency between them. First of all, with all my respect to my own country, the local elections in Ukraine never played such a prominent role as the presidential or parliamentary elections, because even if we are in the middle, so to say, of reforming, the local or the composition of the local powers in Ukraine, we're still far from that, and I don't think that the result of the elections will be as dramatic for Ukraine, and of course for other countries, including the United States, as the presidential elections in the United States. Coming to the elections in the United States, as I already said, I don't think that whoever is elected, I don't think it will change dramatically the attitude in the United States towards Ukraine. There may be, of course, some tactical changes here and there. For example, I think that in any case, the area which needs to be paid more attention in the US is not as much the economic reforms in Ukraine, but how to bring more US investments to Ukraine. Because even if if I fully agree with Mr. Bonner that the first problem and the reason of the lack of investments is the poor legislation in Ukraine and the high level of corruption, but still there are things which could have been done, because we know that the United States business is investing heavily, for example, in Africa, in Latin America, where the level of corruption and poor legislation is not lower than in Ukraine. So this is the area which may be looked at differently after the presidential elections in the United States. Probably the new administration, again, whoever wins, will pay more attention to this economic and business part of our cooperation. In other spheres like security, military, financial assistance, I think it will continue like that. I like to say that, from my own experience, I remember very well that when people talk about bipartisan support in the United States, we should be reminded that this kind of support started even before Ukraine has become independent. I remember the 70s and the 80s when I started more or less my diplomatic career, probably thanks to the powerful Ukrainian diaspora, probably because of some similarities to the situation with the Baltic states and Ukraine. In the United States, in Congress, there was always a very high level of support and the attempts to help Ukraine, even when it was part of the former Soviet Union. So this is something which has a long history, and it will not be changed, of course, by any result of presidential elections in this country.
Thank you, Ambassador. Brian or Solomia, do either of you want to respond to the second question or dig deeper?
Yes, may I?
Please.
I just want to say that American presidential election will show the will and the choice of the American nation, and whoever will win, I hope will continue to be as ones to confront the hybrid, I would say, threats, Russian threats. And I think in this case, we have to be united. But to go back to what Honorable Ambassador said, for example, about the local elections in Ukraine, and I think that would be interesting for Ukrainians who are with us tonight. Yes, never local elections were so important, but still after decentralization and during decentralization, the role of regions are raising. And what we see now after with the huge support of the personnel of President Zelensky, and then with the majority in the parliament, we have the ratings going down with the servant of people, Sluga Narodu, and they can say very frankly and open that, actually we do not need the victories in the regions. And that's a classic rule of politics. When the parliamentarian faction or parliamentarian party does not have support in the regions, so you have to you can see in the other elections their failure, and I think that we will see this soon, because the Brian was right. Servant of people and Mr. Zelensky, they are seeking for a new coalition. And actually for now, we know so far that two groups are already in the negotiations to have with the servant of people of new coalition. And I think that at the end of October, we will see the dismiss of this cabinet, and will get new government, I think, in November. If not, probably Rado can go for re-elections soon. That's my point from the parliament, and that's the kitchen from inside. And the last one, nevertheless, we are in this process, but still it will be interesting, the end of October and the beginning of November, both in Ukraine and of course in the US we are looking at. I'm done.
Thank you. Brian, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I want to say, I mean, the weakness of servant of the people now is one reason why people like Gennady Trakhanov might get reelected, probably get reelected as Odessa mayor, Gennady Kirnes in Kharkiv. These are the number 2 and 3 cities. It's a symbol of the failure of rule of law. The evidence of treason and corruption against both these individuals in a rule of law country, they would certainly be charged and tried. Not happening here. As a result, they're going to continue probably to take over that. And I'm an elected member of the American Chamber of Commerce, and I was a former board member of the European Business Association. We just have to cut to the chase. The reason why Ukraine doesn't have investment of the quantity that it needs is simply lack of rule of law. Investors don't feel safe, lack of independent courts. It's as simple as that. It's a time-old story, age-old story since independence, unfortunately. And about the American election, since I'm the non-Ukrainian on the panel, I am an American, I will say what the Ukrainians won't, because they're very smart and they don't want to do anything to disrupt bipartisan support. And I don't either, because I do believe it's very firm and strong. And if people read the Kyiv Post, they know that we have a robust debate. There are Ukrainian Americans who are avid Republicans and Ukrainian Americans who are avid Democrats, and we give space to both of them. But I personally think there's not even a clear choice. I mean, there's not even a real choice. Most Ukrainians I know, I can tell you that, are just hoping that Biden wins in a landslide. Why? Because Biden knows Ukraine. He's been here 7 times. He knows the good and bad parts about Ukraine. He knows the players. He's written a book about, his experience, which included a chapter on Ukraine. I know some of his advisors on Ukraine, very knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable. Whereas on the other hand, Trump, Ukrainians are going to be nice. They're going to take the lead from the president and not openly criticize Trump. But we have a person who sympathizes, and it looks like he's, in debt of some sort to Vladimir Putin. I don't know what else explains his fealty to this, murderous tyrant dictator who's caused so much bloodshed in Ukraine, Syria, other parts of the world, murdered his opponents, or implicated in the murder of his opponents. His opponents end up dead or poisoned. So I think Ukrainians, by and large, would benefit. And while we have bipartisan support, it's not enough. This goes all the way back to the 90s when Ukraine missed the train to EU enlargement, largely because of President Kuchma, other policies, communist, controlled parliament in the 90s and so forth. So we missed that train, Ukraine missed that train, but we need more robust, and I'm speaking as American intervention, or that the source people will not like, but America does not run this country at all. So what we need is more active American support, I believe, in all phases, like a best friend. We haven't had an American president here since 2008, George W. Bush. Obama didn't show up in 8 years. Trump, as we know, didn't show up in 4 years. So that kind of neglect at the top is not good for Ukraine, not good for its strategic place in the world. And I hope to see that change, although the world has changed quite a bit in the last year alone. I think that's it.
Thank you, Brian. So this question may be more for the ambassador from one of our guests. Both Ms. Bobrovska and Mr. Bonner have identified some dramatic deficiencies in the domestic reforms that need to take place. What are the realistic prospects for rolling back the influence of the oligarchs on the Ukrainian judiciary?
Well, I think it's more, this question is more for other participants. I can only offer you my personal opinion that to diminish the role of oligarchs, for diminishing the role of oligarchs, we just need to do what everybody is talking about: legislation, anti-corruption efforts, and only things like that would diminish their role. And well, of course, I don't have any links with any of Ukrainian oligarchs and never had, and I'm very happy. But obviously, when you talk about domestic politics, I understand quite well that many things in Ukraine are under heavy influence of oligarchs. And by the way, starting from the parliament of Ukraine, which is a pity. But unfortunately, this is a tradition of Ukrainian politics from the very first day of Ukrainian independence. Whether they were communists or the party of the regions or the former party of the, it was always, all of them were always heavily influenced by oligarchs. And this is the beginning of the problems, because the country is divided between oligarchs, these spheres of influence. It started during Kuchma time, and it continues until this day. And so, just let me say once again that I fully agree that this is the task number one. Otherwise, we'll continue dragging on reforming the country, and nothing dramatic is going to happen.
I agree, and I would add that, I mean, media is one of them, because the same five guys own most of the media, and this is why the independent media, news journalism space is very important.
With the exception of Kyiv Post.
Exactly. So that's, you're right, Your Excellency. So we need that. We need to, but that's within the power of the government. They can demonopolize ownership of media. It's been done before. It can be done. And what is so nefarious is we have these, what I call populist, and Solomia can speak to this, and good luck proving it, because we haven't been able to, but I've talked to many people who were in government and left government, and basically they say, okay, our populist salary is 50,000 hryvnias, 1,700, but actually they find a way to give deputies 10,000 a month, ministers 50,000 a month, whatever. This is not right. We should have, I mean, Ukraine needs leaders who say, listen, if you want a great economy minister, if you want a great, honest parliament members, pay them decently, elect them fairly, and hold them to high standards. That's not happening.
And I just want to answer the question as well, that until each president, Ukrainian president, uses judiciary to serve their personal profit or problems, till we won't get, or we won't diminish this ties with the oligarchs. So it can be endless story, but at the same time, yes, media and the civil society, they have to demand from the top politician and presidents as well, finally to cut this story with the judiciary and courts as well.
Thank you. So we have a question that is about sort of the balance of the focus of the future of Ukraine. And the question is, will the next Ukrainian government, meaning after the election, will there be a continued strive for Western partnerships? And the example they give is such as NATO. Or do you see the next government focusing more so on internal Ukraine? And that's
Okay. I will be very brief in answering this question. I think there are three pillars without which Ukraine will never survive the struggle with Russia. The first is United States, the second is NATO, and the third is European Union. With all my respect to all other factors which have the influence and importance for Ukraine, these are the three main pillars. That's why I'm strongly convinced that any future or next Ukrainian government will be following this line, because we were learning this for 29 years now, and I think that with the exception probably of the real opposition in Ukraine, which is pro-Russian, but I don't believe that they would ever be able to come back to power in Ukraine anymore. That's why any new Ukrainian government will be obliged to follow this line. First of all, this is about foreign policy, but it's much wider. It's also about the international assistance, internal reforming, and other things. So I remain optimistic in that sense.
May I? I would say that thanks God that the previous convocation enshrined the Euro integration course in the Constitution, and I hope no one will say ever to change this back. But still, I'm going back to the role of elections, local elections, and when we'll see the map of Ukraine, especially the eastern part and the southern part. What I'm afraid of after 25th of October, that the majority in the local councils will get pro-Russian forces, and that's and this is again about the national security and about the course of Ukraine. Because in 2014. I believe so. Not only language was the point to make Russian aggression, but the will of Ukraine to go west. And I think for president, for government, they have to be very very precise to the eastern and southern regions in this nearest future, because they have to be strong with their heads of the regions, with the heads of the security services, with the head of the police, and with the head of their even political parties representatives. So that's my thoughts.
Well, there's a question here that's something that I can appreciate as well, which is, what is the state of higher education in Ukraine? And then we have another one that's quite lengthy. I don't think we can get to the whole thing, but there's concern about how education is being treated in Ukraine, and whether Ukraine will become fully compatible per the Bologna Declaration of 1999. So I think there's some questions about higher education in Ukraine, and I think maybe we should frame those questions in the context of the election, and whether any of the candidates are running on education platforms and seeking education reform.
I think I have.
Yeah, well, it's hard to answer the question about education. I'm not following this closely. I can only say, probably as a joke, but this joke has a part of the truth that during my time, the standard of education in Ukraine was much higher than today, even if that was during the Soviet time. But well, this of course my personal observation, because we cannot really compare the education in the 70s and in the 80s and now. But of course, Solomia is much more aware of this issue.
As I mentioned before, that Mr. Scarlett, who is accused in the plagiarism, and who in 2014 they prohibited for students to hang out the Ukrainian flags. Now is acting Minister of Education, and I would say that I can't remember who can be compared with him, probably Mr. Tabachnik during Yanukovych period. Zelensky said that he had 2 months to act as a minister, and then because that's the period to test Mr. Scarlett. But still, Zelensky is not answering the question, did Scarlett pass the exam or not on his post. But what I have to say that the previous government, even with Honcharuk on the head and Hanna Novosad, who was the Minister of Education, and the Minister of Education during Groisman and Yatsenyuk, who were prime ministers, they started 2 main reforms. That's a new Ukrainian secondary school, and they started the reform of the higher education. And I think that, for example, even the words, and during especially the current time, and putting into the doubt that external independence assessment, that's not so useful reform, and we can be back to the normal exams. I think that's the worst we can heard and expected for the last even 10, 12 years, because, for example, 13 years ago, I was the first line of the pupils who finished the school and who passed through this external independent assessments. And I think that would be a really reverse back from the educational reform. I hope Scarlett will dismiss as well at the end of October with the all cabinet. So I'm optimistic as well.
Brian, anything you want to add, or I'll go to the next question?
I'm a University of Minnesota graduate. The school system can't be that bad, because I know a lot of very smart Ukrainians all around me. But Ukraine's budget, national budget, is only $50 billion. There's not enough money for everything, and including education. And that's a piece of it. And then I don't know how much stock you want to put in rankings, but there are no Ukrainian universities in the top 400, I think, nationally. So this is a problem. But Ukrainians have so much more mobility now and are able to get access to Western educations.
So we have a question which appears to be from a member of Parliament in Canada. And I'm not going to call that person out because I'm not sure if they want to be used by name, but I think it's a very fair question. Canada, like the US, has supported Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Canada and other countries have also encouraged and invested in programs to further Ukraine's domestic reforms, such as healthcare system reform, police reform, etc. What more can the international community do to encourage the domestic reforms that are needed?
Well, I think that, well, by international community, of course, in this case, what is meant probably is the Western world, because I don't think that the countries of the third world, of other continents, are as much interested in Ukraine's reforming as the EU, NATO, and other countries of the Western Hemisphere. I think that more pressure is needed. This is number one. Second, of course, is more assistance to Ukraine to overcome the consequences, and we are not there yet, of the Russian aggression. Because, of course, when my country needs to pay so much, money, energy, efforts, attention to everything which is connected with the, fighting with Russia intervention, many things remain unnoticed or undone, including the pace of reforms. And of course, a lot of finances is being, detracted from not only education sphere, as Mr. Bonner rightly said, but also from many other spheres which need to be reformed. So I would say, two things: more pressure on Ukraine in a positive sense, and more assistance, to support our struggle against Russia.
I would say, if we're talking about the domestic reforms, that's the more pressure on the president and the government on pushing reforms, because so much was done that it's actually there are no excuses if we fail now. And especially I understand Canadians who made and continue to make so much to support Ukrainians, especially Ukrainians who are in Canada as well. From my point of view, that's more talks, more meetings with even MPs from the Conservative people to understand them and to listen to them, because sometimes I'm even can't believe that Conservative people can be so. I'm sorry for that, but so primitive in their views and their imagination of how the state system has to work, especially the condition of lasting Russian-Ukrainian war. So I agree with the Mr. Ambassador that it's more press, but first of all, it's more pressure on the president to push the reforms.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that. I mean, from America, of course, I would like to see more engagement, especially if you're Ukrainian American, Ukrainian Canadian. Really get engaged in what is happening here day to day, the big picture, the small picture, the detailed picture, because that's the way you can support Ukraine with, the EU used to call it tough love, or I think that was Ambassador Washuk from Canada. And the EU used to call it, you do more and then we'll do more. We need the engagement. And I think on Ukraine's side, I talk to people in NATO and the EU. To declare you want to join NATO and EU is a great declaration. And I do believe that the majority of Ukrainians do want this direction in their country, but it's not enough. I mean, you have to meet all the conditions. And for NATO, it's being a democracy and a rule of law country, and for the EU too. So it's not a checklist of whether your interoperability of the military is there. It's a wider scope.
There's a question. I think we're going to do 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to call it a night. 2 or 3 more. There's a question about the gridlock in Ukraine and how it's different from the gridlock in the United States. And that sort of connects also with a question that I have around what are the impediments to creating a more united Ukraine? Obviously, there's questions that have come up tonight about corruption and about the oligarchs' involvement, but there's also there seems to be a divisiveness, and Russia certainly is driving part of that. So let's go back to that first question, which is, how is the gridlock in Ukraine different from the gridlock in the US, and what can be done about it?
Let me not be the first this time. I'm trying to.
That's why you're an ambassador.
To invent the answer, but I can't. So I would say
How bad is gridlock in Parliament? Oh, go ahead. Nobody wants to answer it, so you.
No. Solomia will be the first.
Okay. You mean the actually as gridlock as a lockdown in US and Ukraine?
No, so gridlock as in the Democrats and the Republicans have an incredibly difficult time getting anything done in the United States. For example, right now in that COVID context, there is some legislation called Phase 5 legislation, and we're now, I think, in the 8th version of potential bill, and still they can't come to conclusion about direction. And we're still, all of America is waiting and waiting and waiting for this legislation to move forward. And it's gridlock. It's gridlock. You know, the parties, eye to eye, it's constant fighting.
I think that I'm sure that some of the people, they are lucky to have the opposition, which has more experience than members of parliament who represent the servant of people and who are serving in the government. Why? Because, for example, the European Solidarity or Batькivщина faction or for future and so on. To be honest, they are not for the first time in the parliament and not for and they served in the government. So they are very helpful, even in being the opposition, with all advices and all critics to government and to serve the people. So we are as maybe it's more easier than in the US, but here in Ukraine, usually, or actually at the beginning of the quarantine, opposition sometimes was hurt, and the government was trying to be loyal and to find the compromises. But now, when we have the second wave of the quarantine, and when it's much more serious, looks like than even it was in spring, I think, and when we see that all money went from the budget, COVID budget, so-called COVID budget, to build the roads, but not to make all needed conditions in the hospitals, I think that we'll have a problem. Yes, now we are not working in Kyiv in the parliament, but what we are seeing in the regions, I think that we will be back in a few days to parliament very angry with lots of questions to the government and to certain people, what you have done with the money and why you are not ready after the 6 months of knowing what's going on in the world and in Ukraine, and we have to be prepared for the second wave. So sometimes it's very hard, but sometimes we have to find the compromises to be as ones, because these elections, regional, they, believe me, they will be not as it was 5 years ago or any previous elections. I think they will show that the opposite view as the red line or red card in comparing with 2018 with the green to Zelensky and to serve the people to the parliament.
Okay, so then why don't I ask our final question, and we'll leave it with that. And this is a question that connects, I think, with who we are at Manor College as a Ukrainian Catholic Basilian institution. And this is a great question from one of our audience members, and he asked us very early on. He said, how can I help Ukraine and Ukrainians by volunteering time, skills, tradecraft from the United States? Thank you.
Can I answer? I will be quick. I know that I know really great organization, Razom for Ukraine. They're very active. That's the organization of the which unites Ukrainians and Ukrainian representative of diaspora. And I know for sure that they have the lots of ways how to be useful and how to help. Razom for Ukraine, and Luba Shipovich is a very active member. I think she is well known among Ukrainians in the US, and I say that I have to say that you can join the team. I think that the team is worth of being an example how to work and how to support Ukrainians.
I can only fully support Salomia because I know, of course, them, well, even from my New York period. They have started not so long ago, but they're really one of the very few, really important organizations which are doing things not in an old traditional way, like sending humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, which would always end up somewhere where no one can find it. But they are doing very practical things, and if you become part of them, or just establishing some connections with them, they could give you a lot of good advices on very practical things which you can do for Ukraine and Ukrainians. And it's not about money collecting. No, it's about things. I'm not going into the details, but I really recommend as well, to get in touch with them, or you can get in touch with our embassy here in DC, and we will, of course, connect you with proper people from Razom.
Thank you both. Brian, anything you want to add there?
I agree. There's a lot of worthy causes. Read the Kyiv Post. You'll find a lot of them. Ukraine needs so much. But it's the country story. You look at the history, the difficult history. It's a great country. Things are getting better. Sometimes it helps to be my age, older, and then you can see the trajectory from the time I first came here in 1996. Has gotten so much better in so many ways. But our goal at the Kyiv Post is we've had a consistent editorial policy. We believe in Ukraine democracy, Western integration. So we have a clear-cut policy: economic freedom, prosperity, market economics. So we believe that's the path, and we'd also like Ukraine to become an English-speaking nation, because then Ukraine is moving out of its isolation, which was forced upon it. There's the Ukrainian-Russian language debate, but I skirt that by just saying I hope this is an English-speaking country, and that becomes the second language, because that will connect Ukraine to the world, and that's a good thing. And so there's opportunities everywhere. There's a lot of civic groups. There's a lot of volunteer groups. When you can hop on a plane again, please do. No visa required, and you'll see for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you all very, very much for serving as our panelists this evening. Everyone who's at home, please take a moment, and even though only you can hear you, let's applaud our speakers. I'm going to do the same. Say thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys were amazing. Also want to thank the folks who are behind the scenes helping us out with the program, including Kelly Pfeiffer, Emily Carroll, our Marketing and Advancement Office, for their support for today's program. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union. If you're interested in supporting Manor College, please join us at our virtual gala. We'll be on November 12th at 7 p.m. You can register at www.manor.edu/gala/. Also, please keep an eye out for our 10th Ukrainian Dialogue program, which will be upcoming this spring. We're preparing some program options that we're very sure will engage and allow us to discuss key events and relationships. Please keep all of our panelists, Ukraine, our elections, and Manor College in your prayers. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.